So it's been a fortnight, and we're back to the 4 in CL. So this is an event that happens once every Tuesday evening, and it's a team event, as I've mentioned before. And we're in Division 5, despite we were meant to get promoted last time, but that's a story that I covered in the last video. There's not too much else to say really, apart from just getting into the game itself. You'll notice above me my opponent's unrated, but that's just because I don't think he plays any over-the-board events really, he just plays online, like my opponent in round 1. My rating is still the same, although it's probably going to drop. No spoilers for the tournament that I had over the weekend, which I will probably cover once I get around to... they just weren't good games, and it's a bit hard to show, but hey ho, I've got to show wins and losses. Um, so yeah, we're going to get into this game. My opponent plays e4 on move 1, and as we know I play the Sicilian, c5, and my opponent plays knight c3, which is really odd because I play the Sicilian a lot, and for some reason whenever I play it in serious games, all my opponents play the close Sicilian. So when I went to Mill Hill the first time, both my opponents play to the close Sicilian, and here they've got another close Sicilian. Just seems, yeah, odd. Also, I was able to prepare for my opponent before the round because you do see their online account, but pretty much my opponent played e4 and d4 equals amount of times, and then even beyond that, just chose random openings it seemed every game, so there was like no chance I was ever going to prepare for him seriously. So I was just going to see what he played on the day and just hope that instinctively I knew what to play. Against Close Sicilian, as I found out, because I wasn't too sure what to play before, but in the Mill Hill Congress, like I said, I chose this nice c6 idea. It's obviously just the main move, but it leads to quite nice positions, and I'm getting more used to playing them. So yeah, here we go. He plays bishop c4. This move has been played before, but it's just very odd. Typically in the Sicilian, White will hold off on playing bishop c4 before Black has played either e6 or d6. Because if I'm able to play e6 without having to play d6, then I can play d5 in one move. And if you're a player as White, this is something you need to look out for because this just makes my life a lot easier. For example, bishop c4 becomes a lot more tempting after I played d6 because this diagonal becomes a lot nicer for White, and we go from having basically no games to having a few games in the database actually played by top players because they've obviously waited for Black to play d6 before they play bishop c4. But I'm not just going to let him have that for free, so I'm going to play e6 even though it's not my usual setup, but this is what you got to be prepared for. He then plays d3. This is fine, it's sort of like a closed Sicilian structure, and unlike typical Sicilians, it's not going to be as tactical, it's going to be a bit more positional, which is a perfectly fine way of playing it. However, he's not really appreciated my main break in the situation, which is d5, so I'm just going to keep on playing for d5, and this is how you sort of play against the positional ideas of Sicilian. I make a slight inaccuracy, my move's fine, but I play knight g e7 rather than knight f6. It's inaccurate because normally, I think it's just out of habit, but out of habit I'm scared of this pawn coming here because normally the knight's already on f3, and therefore my knight can't take his pawn. But he didn't play this time around, so really I should be paying attention to the board. But again, this is completely fine for me. It serves the same purposes of reinforcing d5. My opponent played f4 anyway, normal Grand Prix close Sicilian idea. I then, of course, strike in the centre, because if I don't do this, I'm just going to be passive the entire game. He then took once, which is fine. I think better here and more often played as bishop b3. And also playing bishop b3 in this move is also fine, so when I play this move it doesn't come with tempo. And that would be perhaps the downside of playing knight g7 rather than knight f6, because the knight on f6 would be a lot more active. But back to the position. But d5 anyway. He took, I took. He played bishop b5. Now this is a common idea that when black goes for the centre push, then you put the bishop on b5, especially if black hasn't played a6 yet. But the down. This is normally in like the sort of sharper topical lines, but because my opponent's been a bit slow, I think so far, it's now fine for me. And he's moved his bishop so many times. It's moved to here. It's moved to. Oh, that's not risk. It's moved to here. It's moved to here, and now it's going to take. So it's moved basically 3 times in the opening 7 or 8 moves, and I haven't had to spend as much time moving this knight. And I'm now going to get the bishop pair from this if he decides to do this, which normally would be okay in the close Sicilian, but again, he's given me a few tempo here and there. I just kick him, so I'm forcing him to take or run away, and if he runs away, then I just start storming him, so he pretty much has to take. He took, I took back, and now if you're a Sicilian player and you see this position, it's a bit odd. You're not used to it, but you would love to have this position after e4, c5, because white's just a bit locked in, and compared to the other super sharp lines where it gets really tactical and quite dangerous for black. Oh, just trying to unclick. Then, yeah, this is quite a pleasant position. So he develops like normal. I bring the bishop. He castles like castle. This is fine. Again, black isn't just better. It's just that black is for choice. Things are just nicer. I have the bishop pair, and as we're going to see, they're going to become pretty important in this game. He brings the queen to the center. I play b5. My idea is that I want to be able to play d4, but I don't want to play d4 and allow his knight to e4, because then that would be annoying, and I don't want to trade one of my bishops to get him off that square, and I don't really have a knight well positioned to attack e4 either. And the other idea that I suppose I could do, which I end up doing actually, is f5 to attack it, but at this point I'm not too sure that's a bit soon, and this side is a bit more cleaner. Also forces him to play a3. And look at all this space I've gotten, and it additionally gives my space for the bishop, and this bishop is just going to eventually destroy this game, as we're going to see. He plays rook d1. This is supporting d4, but d4 doesn't really work yet because of his opened king, so we can imagine some stuff taking. So after my move, which is sort of a slide move, that doesn't really affect d4. I'm just lining up against the queen. But if we imagine that he tried to play d4 here, these moves are not good moves, but we can now see that he's pinned, and even worse now that my rook's come to this file, he's attacked, so he's not really preparing d4 with this move. Really, he should be trying to develop this bishop, if I was him, and then get these rooks to this file and try and contest the open file. But he plays this instead. He moves the queen away, getting out of the sort of discovered attack and also attacking the pawn, even though it's defended at the moment. Now, was it here? No, not yet. I played rook c8 because I had dreams of eventually getting this bishop to the square, skewering the queen and winning the game in style. But it's also a completely fine developing move, and it helps in a lot of situations. Also, this rook has a lot of pressure down the c-file, which is another way that you could play this position that I'm going to come to later, which is quite instructive, I think. Rook e1, just contesting the file, which I think he should have done, so he's sort of admitting his mistake. D4. Now, I actually thought a while in this position, because I don't want to play d4 because I allow his knight to e4, but how else do I progress in this position? And it wasn't entirely clear for me how to do it. Now, the computer gives a line, which I don't think I would normally understand, but it's actually really similar to a game that I played in Mill Hill and uses the same idea. So the computer's idea, I think it's in this position, is to play knight d4. And at first, this looks like a sort of well, it's first we got to discuss if you're losing a pawn. Well, you're not, because pawn takes. You're up a pawn, but then this idea that I've been talking about for a while: skewer the queen, win the game. However, I didn't like this idea because he could double my pawns, and this becomes a bit awkward. But then we sort of have to ask the question: well, what does white actually play? Because white has to move the knight so the queen still defends the pawn, so the knight can't go to this square. Probably doesn't want to go back here as well, because that would just block an even wall development. So he's actually got to go to a2. It's the only real reasonable square. And then this position, despite being a pawn down, is very good for black. And I think I need a bit more experience in these positions to be able to say that, because I think it's a bit risky, even though this is the best way to play it. If this is something you haven't seen before and you're not super familiar, to go for this. Because if I've actually got the game up here, this is my game against Junyi in the Mill Hill Congress. We can see that these double pawns, and I remember in that game, I only did this because I had prep in it as well, but these double pawns made his position really hard to play. And it was much better for Junyi because he's actually got a bit more development than the game that we're talking about right now. But this was a very nice position, and we can see the same structure that we have here is also in this game pretty much. So the pawns on this square. But at least Junyi again had more activity, but here I'm definitely much better. It's just hard to say if you do that in an actual game for the pawn. But definitely something I need to think about in the future, especially if I want to be playing knight c6, sorry, into the close Sicilian, because it seems that this is a very common idea that comes up. Instead I went for the push, knowing that he would come to e4, and then I'm just going to keep pushing and gaining space. And I knew this probably wasn't the most optimal way to do this in the game. It's just that in experience, players crumble a lot more when they're put into cramped spaces, and this is kind of what happened in the game. He finally develops his bishop. I play f5 because I want to kick his knight away. He moves the knight away. I'm not interested in taking because I think that would only help him. I improve my queen, just defending this pawn as well. I could also have gone to d5. I think was also fine. He took. I think this is not a good idea for him because now I get a nice solid space advantage. He plays queen f1, attacking my pawn. I play d3, sort of defending. And this whole time I think it's been fairly better for black, especially if I found that knight maneuver with the double pawns. But now after c3, his move, these two pawns are controlling all three of his pawns. This pawn is now going to be a massive outpost, and this is what I'm talking about when you push your pawns against players, is sometimes they're not sure how to solve them correctly. And speaking from experience, this is what I've done in my recent tournament this weekend, is I didn't manage push pawns as well as I should have done. And it led to some really uncomfortable positions where you got to find really precise moves. And this is already quite good for black. And as we're about to see, this has now opened up. This bishop's going to come here. And this is just going to be complete hell for white, and it's going to be next to unplayable. So this is what I do, bishop c5, the king has to move away, you can't block with any of the piece. You could do this to give up, but then you lose pawns just to get the bishop, and I guess you have this as well. So maybe we wouldn't take that pawn. But yeah, it just becomes incredibly awkward for black, and you've already got the pass pawn. So it's just a lesser of two evils. He plays king h1. Now, I saw, again, there's a really insane computer idea here, which is again to sacrifice a pawn, and I saw this move in the game, but I didn't play it because I saw it lost me a pawn. But, so, as we can see, this square's super weak, so it'd be really nice for me to get my knight, if I can draw arrows to this square. But the downside of doing this is that the knight then comes to d5, and perhaps maybe pause this. This is more of a positional idea. Is this idea sort of, how do you evaluate it? Would you go for this idea in a game if this is what you saw? I have given it a bit of a way, but basically the idea from the computer, if you want to pause it, the idea from the computer is, oh, that's why I played, is knight a5, The knight comes in as I expected, hits the queen. Queen moves. Knight takes pawn, so this is the pawn you're giving up. But then your knight comes in, and the computer argues that this is just completely crushing for black. White has no play, has no space. This is being hit. This is being hit. You have to defend the bishop. Then you can start bringing the rooks now, whereas I brought the rooks first. And if we just carry on, there's a few computer moves. This is just crushing, and we can see that White has no space, and it's just very good for. But again, I think this is very hard to play, and even from this position, it's hard to play. So I think my move is a lot more human and natural, and I think doable. So he brings the knight in anyway, but this is now really not a good idea for him because I can open up my bishop. I kept my knight back here just specifically so I could trade with him. So I trade with him, he trades, I trade. And I bring my rook across just to defend this pawn. And there are now going to be some really nice tactics lining up for me just because of these monster bishops. Oh, monster bishops. He plays b4. This gives him some ideas of attacking or counterplay, but again, in this position, it's so hard to come up for a move for White, even though material's equal. This knight can't come here, can't take, and can't go here. It's just stuck, basically. This bishop is stuck behind these pawns. And then you compare that to my minor pieces, and then you compare the rooks, and it's easy to see why black is much better. So he just decides to go for a break. Of course, I'm not going to allow him to create some space, and I want to make another pass pawn, so just en passant, take. He then attacks, which I saw coming, so queen d5, centralizing, defending all of these pawns, and also setting up a nice tactic, where it looks like I'm hanging a pawn. So if knight takes, I can then take with the rook, he takes with the queen, but then checkmate, so he can't actually do that. I assume my opponent saw this because he didn't fall for this. He defended his pawn in the centre because I was also attacking the pawn, which is why this queen was so nice. I now just defend my pawn because I can keep the tactic alive, but I'd rather just positionally grind out my opponent because, again, this knight is awful. This bishop is staring into its own pawn. It's basically a pawn with a pointy hat. It's not really doing too much. Sorry. Yeah, and at this point, my idea is probably just going to start storming these pawns. So, which is why a4 is quite a nice move. He actually stops me from playing a5, a4 myself and connecting the pawns and just making my life easier. So I bring my rook over, he attacks my rook, I bring it back to attack his pawn, so he's got to move back. And we effectively, it looks like a waste of moves by me, but I've just gained a tempo by moving my rook. And now it's my move again, but my rook's on a better square now, so it's a nice little maneuver. I bring my queen in, defending and attacking all of these pawns and the bishop. He attacks this pawn and sort of pins it a bit, but I'm okay with that because I'm happy to exchange. Even though this pawn looks like the centre pawn and it's been the main point of this whole game so far, I can now take on the flank and I've got two connected pass pawns. I can bring it back, my queen back to line up with this check, but if you want to pause the video and find the much better and more obvious move that I missed in the game, and I have no excuse for this apart from it's internet chess and visualization's hard. The bishop's hanging. I'm an idiot for not seeing this, but it just shows how strong my position is that I can miss a hanging bishop and I'm still completely winning. He brings a check, which I saw coming, but I can just sidestep it. My king's really safe on g2. He has to go back because his last move was check, but now I'm threatening checkmate again. And now I can just start pushing the pawns. He has to defend, keep pushing. He has to keep defending checkmate again. The knight and the bishop are just very stuck, and these bishops are completely dominating the position. I can keep pushing. Hence why I wanted these pass pawns. I think he goes back because he's willing to sacrifice, but again, this is just now at fork, and he's had two pawns to the piece now, but I've got the pawn back, so I'm now just up a clean piece. And this is pretty much game over at this point. I set a nice tactic here just to finish it off, or hope to at least. I just hang my rook because if he takes, he can take the pawn. But perhaps if you want to be a bit more accurate, again, maybe pause the video and see if you can find, using the same idea of the checkmate, just a nicer tactic that you can play here. So the nicer move is bishop d4. The same idea is that the bishop can't be taken because you're hanging checkmate, but the advantage of this move is you're also attacking and pinning the rook and the queen. But again, this is completely fine. He now moves his queen out of the way. I start pushing because I want to get rid of this knight, and I want to get my rook to be able to come to e2 in many lines. He brings the rook back, so now I can bring my queen across and attack on e2. There's not much to suggest for white here. He moves the rook because I'm also attacking the pawn, but that's not really... I'm going for checkmate. And that now, at this point, I think, is pretty much forced checkmate, because he just has to give up his queen and these bishops. They haven't moved for the last 10 or 15 moves, they've just been in complete control of this game. Yeah. So he moves his queen, I take with check, he has to take back, I take again, he takes again. And this is now just checkmate. I think at this point it was like a checkmate in 6 or something. And these are all the fastest way to do it. And he resigned here, but I mean, small bonus point if you can spot the checkmate in 1. Yeah, just queen g4 and the game's over. So yeah, a nice game. Luckily this time my team actually won on the other boards, so we defaulted on 1, but we went 3 for 1 overall, and our second team also won. So that was good, yeah, and hopefully we can continue to do well in the tournament. So yeah, there'll be another video, continue the series another 2 weeks, and I'll probably at some point, once I get the confidence, I'll show my games from this weekend tournament. But cheers, thanks for watching.